So it gives me enormous pleasure this morning to introduce, we're on All Saints Day, so one of the saints, I think, who rocked up this morning to Leon on Tottenham Court Road with something I don't even think I can describe how it made me feel. Just really blessed and happy and fortunate and humble. This amazing sculpture.
Yes,
Something.
I think you could call it that.
With We Are Spectacular on it, and lots of lovely quotes about the podcast and being on the podcast from people who've been on the podcast. So it's my massive, massive, massive pleasure to introduce Carolyn Ball.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you for having me.
That's great.
It's been a journey already to get here.
Yeah, well, we've been together for almost an hour or an hour and a half already,
Yeah.
so that's been lovely. So your day started...
My day started in Peterborough at about 4, and because it was pouring it down with rain, I dressed the sculpture in very glamorous black bin liners and duct tape, and then got a cab to the station and just had the fortune of meeting some wonderful people along the way, all of whom I've got photos with.
Yes.
And then arrived in Lyon and had some pics taken, just to really say thank you so sincerely, Mark, for being able to share and allow others to listen to just the most incredible curation of voices from all sorts of different perspectives. It's just been incredible to listen to. So it was my way of saying thank you. And to everyone who wrote and gave me quotes, it was heartwarming.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, just to think, people write and say, nice episode or bad episode or whatever. But it just really, I'm just really blown away. So thank you.
Pleasure.
Times a million. So Carolyn is the, what do we call you, sales director?
That's the job title, yeah.
At Gather and Gather.
But we're less believers in job titles, I think, is probably a good thing to say.
A good thing.
So, yes, but I am on the sales team. That's absolutely right, at Gather and Gather. And for those who don't know, we operate predominantly within B&I. And
so what's B&I, just so people
business
know?
and industry.
Got it.
And we set up and work with organisations who are looking to, in an ideal world, make food something that's more than just an obligatory provision for their people, and how to turn it into something that has much more of an emotional currency to it, so that they really can give something back to the guys that are basically making the whole show run.
So can you give some examples of places that you're parachuted into?
Yeah. So one of my favourites is Bench in Farringdon, which is part of the Goldsmiths Centre, and it's a fully commercial setup. You can go in off the street, but it's a lovely example of how we have worked with the centre to enable them to have food which is much more representative of who they are as a culture, as well as just a business. It's just been a wonderful way of working so closely so that food ceases to be something that's so transactional and actually starts to speak a bit more louder, prouder and more definitively for what they're trying to do. So it's been great.
Well, I think it's just getting away from the C word, isn't it? Canteen or cafe or, work restaurant, whatever it is. And I mean, I always think about years ago, I worked at IBM when I was a kid. It was like my Gap sandwich or whatever. And it was just, school dinners for adults, I suppose.
Yeah.
But then shockwaves went through the entire, site that was about 3 miles long, when they actually had a concession. I mean, not that it was very healthy, but they had concessions of Burger King, Pizza Hut and stuff. People were just losing their minds. They were just like, an actual Pizza Hut? It was just like a little stand,
Yeah.
But it was just instead of... And also, I don't think it made the workforce very productive, right?
No.
So, you were tired because it was, a lot of shift work. And then you were having, which I never usually do for lunch anyway, and most, a lot of people don't, was big, sloppy, sort of 3-course meals, and, almost like having a Sunday roast. And then you go back and then you slump, and, so you're thinking, that can't be right. Another interesting thing was they had a 36-minute lunch hour.
Yeah.
And
really
they
tight.
had done research to say that was the optimum time
to allow
that
people
needed
yeah.
to then go back to.
Yeah.
So, but then they gave you at the other end, so you actually could get away early. So it was quite a nice flexi system they had.
Yeah.
There you go.
I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges, is that everyone has a completely different setup, and trying to figure out what that is and how to create something that works is just completely different for absolutely everybody. But yeah, gone are the days where it's okay to have something that looks really antiquated and sometimes, dare I say, to be really blunt, quite disgusting. You know, and we've had a complete transformation in schools. And I think, you know, the other thing, that's a different subject entirely, but I think one of the really brilliant things now is that the food world couldn't be more exciting. There's such a responsibility there, but it's a very diverse, very live, very vibrant world. And what I love passionately is that there's a really amazing chance now to get that diversity and make it accessible to a world which, you know, historically, I think is fair to say, hasn't really had that much of an influence and an impact from it. But why should you have to compromise your enjoyment and what you get from food just because you're at work?
Well, it's really interesting, you know, where a few years ago I was working with a different B&I supplier, and it was funny, we went to one of their offices, and you know, the stuff they had was nice, you know, it was nice stuff going on, but I think it's getting over that perception that the grass is greener if you go outside for lunch, you know. So how do you keep people there and keep them excited that the range is as good as what they think? But we stood at the front door. It's quite interesting. We stood at the front door and we counted. We could see the people, you know, walking past the work food space. What do you call it these days? Work food space?
Well,
like that?
That works.
Okay. And then, just straight across the road, like a bunch of lemmings, just all going to prep.
Yeah.
So it was just like, it's obviously there's an issue there. So, and I think maybe enough of the facilities management or the office management, they're maybe not reaching out to everyone that works there as much, and it's maybe their opinion more than, or they're trying to please the older, more cynical majority and forgetting the breadth of people they have.
I mean, I think cynicism's just really fashionable sometimes, sadly.
Twitter.
Yeah, but I also think that things are starting to shift, and you know, whereas once upon a time it probably was much more of a hard sell to go in and say, you know, this has the capacity and carries the ability to really make a tangible impact on your people. You know, we've got so much in the press and so many examples now of how it's made a difference, that actually you're going in with something that's much more evidence-based, which always helps.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't matter how effusively you talk about something, you know, data is king and all of that.
Yeah.
And so I think, you know, now people are more receptive, and also, you know, we talked about this a bit before, Mark, but food is really close to my heart anyway, but I think it carries such emotional currency that, and I would say this, but that businesses are really, you know, they're missing out massively if they don't just look to harness it, because it's such a wonderful thing that makes people feel great. You know, you can really change someone's day, sometimes without even knowing it. By the smallest of margins, but to them it may have moved mountains. And I think the businesses that are recognising that, and it's usually, you know, in our experience, it's been about the people that are in those roles. You know, you mentioned the FM roles, but sometimes it's more about, you know, from an HR perspective, what they're looking to actually engage their people in, and how you can look at food as a messaging, you know, as a form of communication. That's when it gets exciting, because then you get a narrative.
Well, yeah, I think it's so interesting, because it's just going to mind, I've got a meeting this afternoon about employee engagement. So it's with a client, and you know, we're starting to do a lot in that area. And it's intrinsically linked with that, but also intrinsically linked with your brand.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the war for talent at the moment, you know, and it's just vicious out there in all sectors, not just, you know, for the hospitality sector that we're thinking about. And then also on top of that, it's making sure you link all that up. So how can that actually be positioned as benefits and rewards and something exciting, and the value of that could save you 10, 20, 30 million pounds on recruitment by just getting that right and having something worth talking about. You Yeah, it's really exciting area.
Also, just as, you know, a fundamental premise, if you're happier, you do better work.
Sure.
And, you know, I think one of the best things about, you know, where we are currently is we've got a really lovely team, and everyone is looking to do, in our immediate team, is really looking to do something quite different and quite and that becomes infectious. And I think if you're in a business where actually you can tap into that and you can create a bit more of a kind of ripple effect, food can have a halo effect on a business. So that's a really exciting space, I think, not just for us, but collectively as a sector. You know, the more the better, really, because it's changing the conversation, which allows it to open up, which I think is great.
And also, if the high street is struggling, you know, the opportunity for exciting collaborations and pop-ups and all these things, that, you know, it seems like it's a sector that people aren't looking at enough. You know, to actually go in and, you know, if you can't afford your street food thing, to go high street, you know, actually there's some really exciting ways to get visibility, distribution through many, many other ways. Hugely so.
And, you know, we talked about this a bit before, Mark, but when Gather and Gather, you know, rebranded to Gather and Gather.
What was it before?
It was Mighty Catering Services.
Oh, was it? Okay. Yeah.
And one of the main mandates was, you know, create something that has a disruptive force within the marketplace and that has the ability to have a halo effect. And, you know, I remember vividly reading an article in The Caterer, I think it was, and it was an interview with Alistair.
By the way, just so you're a machine on reading stuff and taking in information. Like, I can't believe how much you absorb.
I do. I'm a book geek, I suppose, and not just a book geek now, because I think there are loads of ways you can consume. But that's another subject, isn't it?
But I think what we'll be able to do is all the wonderful things you share with me and you share online, and we can maybe get a top hit list or something to put on the show notes, because I think it would be invaluable for people. You know?
It's very personal. So some of it's completely lateral, and not 100% obviously on point. But I found it really valuable. But this particular piece, I remember reading, because Alistair had said, you know, we've got to produce well-managed numbers. Of course we have. But when we do that and we do that well, we are afforded the creative headroom and the license to play. And I just thought, you know, it's making sure that always, in my book, you do have the creative headroom to play.
But I think it's rare, actually, you know, meeting you and knowing you a bit online and stuff, for someone in sales to have that much of a creative spirit. I'm almost shocked that that's what you're doing. Do you know what I mean? Because I think you're a new breed of sales director that's not chasing the number, but you're trying to do the right thing. And by doing that, you get thought leadership, and then you're selling intelligently, I guess.
Well, I thank you, because I hope that that's what you know is happening. I certainly am just driven at the moment by the fact that you know, as your podcast has shown, there are amazing voices and brilliant people doing brilliant things, and I just think it would be really remiss not to take heed of some of that. But I think that if you become enslaved to a target and too fixated on the bottom line, then actually, you know, the irony is that bottom line ceases to look so healthy. I just think there's an insidiousness about selling if you focus too much on that. And I'm not saying, just to my boss and my company, that I don't think targets are important, and I don't. I'm not suggesting that they're not, but I think that my focus is less on that and more on the fact that I just really believe that there's an opportunity to do some great things in that B&I space with clients who are just starting to look at it differently. And so then it ceases to become really just about being in that environment, and it becomes more about how can we use food as a vehicle to really talk and speak. And, you know, that's important to me for lots of reasons, which I'm sure we'll come on to. But I think, that's for me why I suppose I approach selling a bit differently, because I don't really think of it as the sell as much as, wow, you're doing something really cool and I like your culture and look how food could say that for you and look how food could do that for you. And so, you know, we've, or I take responsibility. There've been a couple where I think perhaps we've missed the mark, but we've missed the mark because we've gone in at +5, and I'd rather miss the mark at +5 on the basis that at some point, if we keep pitching how we truly believe it should be pitched, there'll be someone up there looking to take it on, and we've got lots of people that are doing that.
Well, I think if you stand for something, then eventually the market will meet you. And it feels like, it's almost like, fun enough, we met in Leon this morning, right? So,
Yeah.
and shout out to the guys there, they were so lovely and helpful
They were
as
brilliant.
well with everything. So with that, with the sort of Leon side of things, for a long time, I didn't get it. I was a bit like, I'm not quite 100% sure what this is, but they did, and actually the market met them.
Yeah.
So I think it almost feels like for you guys with this strong creativity, future food and all these things, it feels like there's going to be a tipping point in an avalanche.
Yeah.
So, you'll get one or two really cool forward-thinking brands that will go, yes, times 100, and then everyone will look to them. So, I was thinking about Google. I went in and I can't even remember why I was talking to the guy, but talking to the head of food at Google, and we were in the Google premises, and he was like, "Do you want a drink?" I was like, "Oh yeah." So walked along, and basically it's so clever because they've got the fridges sort of departmentalised and frosted and stuff. So you had to reach down the bottom for the dirty stuff, iced coffee or Coke or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And everything above the frosted panel was water, and it wouldn't be good for you. So I think the psychology of that's like so interesting as well.
And a lot of places are really up for looking at the tariff and seeing how you can incentivise healthier choices. Not to say that you'd ever put an embargo on sweet tooth treats, because they're, I think, essential some days more than others. But it's just, again, recognising that it shouldn't operate. Food in the workplace shouldn't operate in this kind of weird entity up there. There's a convergence, and there has been, between the workplace and the high street. And now I don't think it's really accurate to call it a convergence. I think it's been a complete blurring of the two.
Yeah.
And now what's really exciting is how can you translate stuff that's going on in the wider food world and put it in a context that allows people to tap into that at work.
Yeah. So jumping around a wee bit then, how did you end up here? What kind of happened in the past? What's going on?
So I was part of a startup. I joined very early on in its life, called Tea Palace, and we were a specialist tea supplier, tea brand. And I just loved the idea of being part of a specialist business, and I like learning. So for me, that was like a red rag to a bull.
Yeah.
Is that the right expression?
Something like
Mixing
that.
up my...
Yeah.
And so I really enjoyed that.
It was a beacon.
It was a beacon,
Yeah.
a signpost, as my dear mum would probably say. So I did that, and I actually ended up pitching to Heidi and Doug and Paul at the time, and the guys there, to try and get Tea Palace across the Gather and Gather estate. And was really nervous, but loved it, because I started understanding a bit more about what Gather and Gather was trying to do in the marketplace, and I just thought, wow, this is really cool. And it tapped into what we were also trying to do from a tea perspective, because there wasn't, at that point anyway, very many people going out and doing tea really beautifully and really brilliantly. And certainly not in this country anyway.
It's still rare.
Yeah, it's different now, because I think people now understand that you can't have an amazing meal, beautiful coffee, and then, I won't name any brand names, but then a real...
Do it.
Well, you can't go in and have amazing coffee and then just have like a sort of a Tetley's tea bag thrown into a cup. Yeah. It just doesn't wash. And Lord love Tetley's, but it's not. It's not something that I think is now seen as just, oh well, So there is the attention there that there wasn't. Yeah. But at the time, it was really challenging, which to me made it really exciting.
Yeah.
and you know, we learnt lovely stories because we worked directly with the tea gardens. And anyway, so I got really, really passionate about it. And we were a small team. And when I met Heidi and the guys, I just thought, wow, this is amazing. And I was kind of reaching a sort of ceiling on where I thought I could get to. And once I start seeing ceilings, I'm not very good then, because I like to, you know, and so I pitched and got some really nice feedback, which was lovely. And then went off on maternity leave, and I left T Pillars at that point because I didn't feel like I could take a maternity, just being honest, take a maternity package and then not go back, because we were a small family really, and the founder was a friend who I was very fond of, so I just couldn't do it. So I left, and then had our darling little boy, and then I went and basically asked Heidi if there might be an opportunity to come and work for them. But in amongst all of that, I suffered from postnatal depression, and just found myself in completely uncharted territory. And I'd gone from feeling so excited, and I attached a huge amount of my self-worth to what I was doing, and what I was doing was going really well, and I just came completely unstuck.
Just kind of rudderless.
Yeah. And huge anxiety set in. And it was just, I don't think I've really got the words to do the whole experience justice, but maybe for some people who are listening, who are maybe going through something like this now or have done in the past, it's a really humbling set of emotions to figure out. But I had lovely supporting family and friends, and you know, I was reporting into Heidi, and she has her own brand of frank refreshingness, and she didn't mistake my lack of confidence, sometimes crippling lack of confidence, as a lack of ambition. And in Gather and Gather, I just found so much that helped me to reframe where I was at. And food for me has like a lovely nostalgia about it, because it was always happy memories at home, and I just didn't recognise myself at that particular time.
You said your mum was a feeder.
Yeah, excuse me. Yes, she was. Food's just been huge, you know, fresh breads, food experiments, some that went right, some that went catastrophically
I'm
wrong.
imagining kitchen explosions.
Yeah, that was me and my brother mainly. And I used to sell bread from my bedroom for 2p, which doesn't sound like a good deal, but actually I didn't have any overheads, did I? So, and had a captive audience. So,
there you go.
But yeah, you know, and I'm making light of some of it, but it was hard. And you know, I remember speaking to my sister, and certain days I just focused on meal times. So if I was really struggling one morning, I would, you know, focus on breakfast and then lunch, and as I said to you earlier, I went into certain cafes and places during that time, and honestly, the people who served me a coffee or got me a croissant or got me some lunch, or, you know, I did it a lot to get out of the house, but they made a massive impact. And I just think, you know, sometimes it's impossible to really take stock, but it's small gestures, I think, that can make a massive difference. And, you know, we talked about it before, but food is really emotional, and you just don't know sometimes what kind of day someone's having. So, you know, in the workplace, food's a way of boosting people up if they're having I was about to swear, a less than good day.
Yeah. You can swear. But I think, you know, having had a bit of ups and downs myself, I think, like, even getting out the house is a big, getting out of bed is a big, you know, a big challenge. So I think that's a really good tip for anyone. Is, doesn't have to be food, but just put markers in your day, your week, or whatever it is, to an appointment to do something, which you'll be, you know, you might not go to all of them, but if it's a activity, or it's a concert, or it's seeing a friend, or, you know, whatever it is, but and also just actually having the confidence in your situation to get out of the house, get dressed, get to the place, and then it can be overwhelming when there's public, and you've got to interact with that person. So it's really nice that you were on the sunny side of the street with that, where you were like, actually, I want to converse with you, and I
But
can see the good in what you were doing.
Yeah, I wasn't initially though, and I guess that's the thing, is that it might be that actually it's all you can do is focus on the next second, and then it becomes the next minute, and then it becomes the next 5 minutes. But I think the food bit for me, I suppose, was that, as you're right, they're markers, but it's also just tapping into something that reminds you that things are transient to a degree. So I felt at times, and I felt at times that, oh my God, I didn't recognise myself, and it was nice to be connected to something that reminded me of so many happy memories, and I then got really close to it, and it sort of like became a bit personified, because it became like a sort of friend. And when I was feeling withdrawn and not really able to chat, there's a communality about having a meal and sharing stuff and giving stuff, and giving food. And so it ended up, through all of that, massively shaping my perspective. And as I said, through Gather and Gather, because they were so, and are, hugely welcoming. And in Heidi, I just found a tour de force of energy. She's like an engine room. And her refreshing, sometimes eye-wateringly blunt approach. I just can't thank her enough, really.
Well, I think it's a huge, shout out as well to Heidi. I know her as well, and I've worked with her, and I had the pleasure of working with her. And I mean, rarely do you meet someone so accomplished and professional and empowering, and and I think it's just impressive. She's just an impressive woman.
She's an
impressive human being.
So
really and I think though I was a bit scared to meet her, but yeah, she was perfectly lovely. I think I think it was, I knew how good she was, and a lot of the time if you meet some people, your equals, or there's a bit of gap or whatever, but when someone's at the top of their game, and you're going to meet them, boy, does it sharpen you up. You're just like, oh God, I've got to be good today.
And she is all of that, Mark, and she just became so much more than a boss. And there were days that I vividly remember, and we were just working on really good projects, and I just remembered what it felt like to be excited again.
That's the point, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I was actually going to ask, was there a moment or a thing that flipped you out of it, or was it a gradual thing?
No, I had a lot of counselling, and postnatal depression comes in lots of different, expresses itself in lots of different ways, and as does all mental health, I think. No one experience is the same. But I had a lot of help, and for me, it was real anxiety. I just couldn't bear to be separated, and it's not rocket science to figure out that after a while that is just not, it's not healthy. But it was really just through making peace with the fact that I wasn't feeling great, and not fighting, and I'm a bit of a, I should be able to do this, merchant, and this never used to be a thing, and so I really battled with it, and I just came to learn that that's actually arguably probably the worst thing that you can do, because you feed something like that.
For sure. Well, they talk about having different parents, don't they? I'm going to get this wrong, but you've got like a nurturing parent, and then you've got a kind of disciplinarian parent, and then you've got a kind of almost a naughty parent, which was, I'm just thinking back to me dodging the trick-or-treaters last night. I went to the pub for a couple of drinks. I was like, one for the road. So that's the naughty parent going, just have it. And I think that sort of disciplinarian one is the one that is sometimes helpful, but actually it's the one that will just cause real self-flagellation, where you're just beating yourself up all the time of, I should be doing it, and should's like the worst word in the English language.
I was just giving myself a really hard time, and beating myself up, and I just I really wasn't sure whether I would be able to talk about some of this to you, but I just through listening and through your amazing podcast with Mark Pitcher, who I just think is a human being of wonderfulness, to quote, the BFG. I had I listened, and maybe this, that it was out there at that time, but it didn't feel very accessible as a subject as much. And so had I listened to and heard that it's okay, and also not only is it okay, but some amazing things can come of utterly heart-wrenching times. And had I heard that, I think I would have just found it really comforting, and in a specifically business capacity too, because I think sometimes there's a lot of very well-meaning, but just take some time out, and I think that's absolutely right. I'm not knocking that at all, but for me, actually, the best thing that I could have done was going back to work and finding people like Heidi, and there's lots of others there. Rob, who's MD of London, but he's heads up creative. He's like a thespian force of nature too, and like talks at 50,000 miles an hour. But I came across people that just I was in a different space there, and it was really helpful. And I think the other thing, Mark, just on that, because I know that sometimes social media gets demonized, and there's a proliferation of messaging everywhere, and it's really noisy. But again, for me, actually listening to some of the voices that weren't mine, particularly in a food space, has just been lovely. It's been great.
Well, I think, and interestingly, we've got another session later today where I think the demonization of social media might come up, and I'm a bit in between, because I think to keep your kid quiet when you're out at a pub, or not a huge fan of that or whatever, but there's the other side, which is the connectedness. There's the wealth of information you can get a hold of. There's the video how-tos, the self-learning, the entrepreneurialism, like how much of the world you can see by not having to go everywhere all the time. And I think also thinking about, when I was a kid, I was in, a little town in Scotland, outside of Glasgow, and when I moved down to London for the first time, I mean, panic attacks, massive, it was huge for like a wee guy that was, surrounded at farms and all this stuff. So I think the fact that they can tap into that world, I think there's a lot of cons, but I think there's a lot of pros too, and it's helping all of us. There's
an amazing TED Talk with a British film director. I'm going to get her name wrong. I think it's Beeban Kidron.
Okay.
And she talks about the film clubs that she set up, and why now, in the age that we're in, can we not give some of these incredible media and film directors the same sort of kudos that we give the likes of Tennyson and Shakespeare, and the cultural significance now isn't just on a written page. And exactly. And it was really fascinating, actually, because I was thinking about that GaryVee podcast, as I'm sure many people have done.
Still ringing in my ears.
And I was thinking, there's that quote, Shakespeare quote, which everyone will know about, all the world's a stage and all the men and women players. And then I thought about GaryVee and how his number one word is accountability, and how that's an aphrodisiac to happiness. And he would absolutely refute the fact that actually the world is not a stage necessarily, and we're not players. We're so much more, so much more than that. And obviously Shakespeare's not here to defend himself, but I think a word off between the two of them would be utterly fascinating. But it's significance in all these things that I just think can be taken into the food world. And I like looking for inspiration in industries that aren't my own, in the one that I'm in, because I just think that then gets exciting. You can start doing spin-offs and ideas that have impact, and you do a full circle. Well, I think so much.
It's really interesting you say that, because it's fresh out of my mouth from the other day, 2 days ago. I was at the Caterer conference, and James, who works the caterer, was interviewing us all, and he said, "What brands do you admire? You know, and who's being disruptive?" And actually, I said Brewdog, and I got a lot of in the audience, but I thought they're doing so much more than you are, so you can't. And I know there's a lot of jealousy with Brewdog, or they're just whatever. You can say what you like, but you've got to admire them. You know, so you know they've got an airline now. You know, it's a bit of a stunt, but you know, an airline, craft beer hotels, you know, and they've changed the face of it forever. So there was that, but then my mouth kind of ran away with me, and I was like, I'd look at the porn industry and the gambling industry, and he just saw everyone go, and it was like, well, you know, I'm not saying the content, but maybe some of it, but I think there's no two industries that have got more of some people's attention and will take your money faster. Yeah. So when you look at that and the tech innovation about what they're doing, I mean, sort of AR and VI and all that stuff, so the virtual reality stuff as well, that'll all be led by those industries because they're looking at more innovative ways to use voice, sight and sound to get their dollar, you know?
And that's the other, I suppose, part of the coin, isn't it? Is, you know, how do you extend brand reach and influence in a way that is going to keep you one step ahead and in the next space, because the next space has never been coming at us at a faster speed. No. And I think, you know, we recently launched obviously the Gathered Table, and we've got a collection of really brilliant sort of bright food minds in there. But we've also got Michael Rolfe, you know, the Mr. Yo-Yo, basically.
I do know Mr. Yo-Yo.
And so I think, you know, again, you can't think of what you're doing in a one-dimensional capacity anymore, because never has there been so much merging of minds. Yeah. You know, and you get, you know, going back to some of the things that I just personally am really interested in how it's all going to play out is the gastrophysics world and the likes of Charles Spence and people who are operating in a way that and thinking in a way that attracts and warrants serious investment into what does this actually all mean, and how can we use that and harness that in a way that is actually going to get a return, but in a way that's so much more tangible and I think wholesome than just the ching ching, you know, in the bank.
And just with the Charles Spencer, isn't it?
Charles Spence,
yeah, Charles Spence. Sorry. So with his book.
Oh yes.
Just maybe talk about that for a sec. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'll eulogise unapologetically. It's Gastrophysics, the new science of eating. Yeah. And you know, he's done a lot of work with Heston. And there is just the most. It's a page turner. It's really easy to read, and it's about as much, I think, a lesson in the art of communication as it is in the actual topic. Yeah. But he talks about how experiential, you know, food is, but in a scientific way, so that it doesn't become, which I probably won't do justice to, a sort of really passionate, fluffy sort of, oh wow, you know, we just want everyone to have a great time. Yeah. There are serious underpinnings of why we all, you know, act a certain way and why we all think the way we do.
Because I think I remember one of the was he not talking about colours in food and all this sort of jazz? I remember that being a key thing.
That was what got me onto it, because I was looking at the difference between truth and perception, and I'd read an article in The Spectator by Rory Sutherland around it. He'd mentioned gastrophysics and gastropolitics actually, but he was talking about sherry at one point, and I was like, yeah, you know, the perception is sherry's, you know, sherry. It's like, you know, but actually
your Gran's cupboard.
Yes, precisely. But you know, Granny just got really cool because there are an amazing amount of increasing number anyway of people who are looking at it in a slightly different way.
Well, there's Zecco, for example. So we worked with the ladies there for a bit when they were launching it.
There's good sales there, you know. So, and that I thought, oh, this is so interesting. You know, the perception is that it's still Granny, but actually the truth is it's racking up some really good sales. There's a really brilliant brand story there. Yeah. People are starting to listen because it's interesting. Yeah. This is really, you know, and then it got me thinking about how actually, you know, in the workplace you position truth and perception, and actually what some businesses are doing and what they are saying is different. Yeah. I think food can actually help them put their money where their mouth is and bridge the gap, because if you're investing in that area, it's about people's well-being. I really do think it is. It's not just about ticking a box, or at least it shouldn't be.
And also, just as you were saying that last piece, it fell from location, looked in.
Actually, yeah, I couldn't see him.
Yeah,
from
no,
earlier.
he was behind you.
Now I'm going to get starstruck.
Hey, Phil. So at Gather and Gather, you've got this mission really talking about better fed, happier and healthy people, and healthier people in the workplace. So do you want to talk a bit to that?
Yeah.
Because it's quite it's a good, strong vision.
Yeah, I think in fairness, we're at a time now where the term historically has been contract catering, but a lot of organisations are looking at it in that way. So that in itself isn't enough of a differentiator. I think it's the way that we are then looking at, right, so how does that translate operationally? What does that actually mean? And I think, the big thing about it is, as I said, taking something that a lot of people are doing well and executing it in a way that says more than just, are you hungry? Would you like some food? Here it is. And that's where, one of the areas that I really like, which probably won't surprise you, is the research side. So if we've got some people that I think, or that we think collectively, we really could do brilliant work with, I love just understanding where they came from, what's their story, what's important to them, and then what does that look like in a food capacity. I probably shouldn't say too much about the details, but one of the things that I'm most excited about is this idea, inspired by the whole gastrophysics piece, is how actually you can take a food concept in a B&I environment and make it feel really homely, but with a sort of larder lab-like extension to it. So instead of it just being your run-of-the-mill, it actually becomes so much more than that. And experimentation that's happening in the likes of the Fat Duck and places like El Bulli, actually it becomes something that's happening downstairs, 3 floors down from your computer. That I think is really cool, because there's a democracy about it there, democratizing food in the way that some brands have democratized fashion. And why shouldn't people have access to some of the most exciting, incredible things that are being explored in the world of science? And that's why I love the Charles Spence book, because I think it makes some of those ideas amazingly comprehensible and accessible in a way that I hadn't previously heard. Stuff happens, doesn't it? But it's when it's communicated in a way that lands that then magic starts to happen, I think.
And if I'm sitting with my client shoes on or suit on or whatever, are they all going to say, sounds a bit expensive, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, probably.
Yeah.
Because everyone always thinks like that, don't they? And, I think that's valid, because price is always going to be really important. And everyone, I think would agree that we're all trying to get more for less because we have less. It's hard. Margins are squeezed, and people are having a really, it's difficult. But I think, to that point, I'd say it doesn't have to be. And I guess that's where I think the creativity comes in, because you can do wonderful things and make a huge impact, and you don't have to have a bumper budget to do it. But it does mean that you need to put in more work, and it does mean that you need to understand how some of these ideas can translate, and have a client who's up for it, who wants to think a bit more laterally. And that's not to say that everything needs to be in that vein. It's just that's the area that I think potentially has or does have the biggest area for growth and for interest, and not just for the UK, but globally. It's fascinating how it's all going to play.
It's huge, and I think it's just those inspiration trips, to other countries and see what's going on there as well, and also, what are the other countries doing in B&I?
Yeah.
Which is fascinating,
Well,
yeah,
very cool, I think. Although I know this is probably going to be a bit of a dividing topic, but there was an article in the FT Weekend, which I love, and it was talking about a place in Tokyo. And
my head just went straight to Japan when I was saying
did
that.
it? Yeah,
for sure.
And there was, about the whole, how Insta-buy are you? And it's, the whole Instagrammability of food. And, people usually think about that much more in a high street capacity. But actually, my God, it's such a vehicle for your business if people are conversing, talking.
Yeah.
And anyway, they had 45 owls, I think, in this particular cafe.
Right.
And people were taking photos with the owls, and the coffee was
Real owls?
real owls. The coffee was amazing. Unless I've completely misread the article, you'll probably get someone coming in going, she's taken it in a complete.
Yeah.
But no, it was, and it made me think. That's the experiential piece. I'm not saying that we would suggest to some of our clients that we should have, a temporary owl sanctuary set up downstairs. But I think, there's a bigger story to that. But it does illustrate the point now that there's the conversation starter, but there's also the fact that actually they wanted to do something quirky, different, individual, hadn't been done before, but they also wanted to be able to get people to come and start their own conversations. And I think that's the bit, is that food should be an enabler. It's not the end of a topic, but what you want to do ideally is set someone else on their own train of thought that inspires something else, and then you've created more than just the sum of your own parts. Certainly if you're in a B&I space, I think that's what you have to do, because it's not, you don't own it. You should be advocates for what they're doing, not ambassadors for what you're doing.
I mean, I think again, going back to it, it's just that brand intrinsic link. What's your value exchange between you and your employees as well, and what are you promising there? But just so much of the time, you just go to these. I'm thinking back to when I was at Bartley Academy. I don't know what it's like now. In London, it was a little bit more shishy, but it was still a bit more like a hotel or so. It was a bit more like a hotel lobby in a sort of international nameless hotel kind of thing. But up in Northampton, it just was like a bit of a canteen,
and it
whatever.
can become really clinical. I think it's really obvious, and maybe people listening will think about their own setup and think actually it still just feels a bit like a bolt-on, like in the yesteryear. I think often that did happen because it became this whole obligatory provision thing. But now, especially given that the workplace is so different, think about how the workplace has changed and people's expectations have changed. We're more demanding now. And the podcast that you had, Mark, with your Buddhist monk, and he mentioned about, we're stimulation junkies. And I thought, that's so true. And, in lots of ways, there's this massive debate about whether you're a capitalist or a materialist now, because, actually we just consume. But I think if you're consuming in the right way, then that can lead to, a really positive output. But as long as it's translated in a way that delivers more than just the transaction, if that makes sense.
Does, definitely. Another thing I was wanting to talk to you about was the dreaded B2B word. So it's always sort of seemed to me that if you are in B2B marketing, it can be seen as the less sexy bit, or, you're not allowed to do as fun things as B2C, and, and then is there a B2B and B2C and all these conversations? But what's your sort of take on B2B marketing in general?
I mean, I personally think that it is exciting. It is exciting, and it can be really exciting. And actually, I saw something on LinkedIn the other day about the B2B strategy of choice being the high school party. I think it was Gary's actually, and how again it's taking it off piste a bit and thinking about actually just doesn't need to be so obvious and so direct and so this is what we're doing, so this is what we're saying. I think sometimes it's really good to rip up the rule book a bit and have different events. And, to a degree, that was why the Gathered Table got so much traction, particularly internally, because it was a way of actually, showing that, yes, we are really serious about getting voices from the wider food world and showing how they can have a real tangible impact in the workplace and doing it rather than just saying it. But I think, to answer your question, I personally feel quite strongly that the way to go about that conversation is to think about different ideas which put a spin on something that they maybe are thinking about but haven't quite addressed in that way. And then actually showing that, okay, if you're thinking like that, then this is what we could make it, look like and act like and be like. So it's taking it in a bit of a lateral direction, I suppose.
Sure. I mean, no, you're right. I think the way, and it's just for any B2B marketers listening, it feels like you've been told somewhere down the line that you've got a more limited toolbox than the B2C marketer. And, you know, again,
Just
thinking
isn't
about
true.
it, every channel's as open to you
Yeah.
as, you know, there's no reason why you wouldn't be posting and advertising on Instagram. There's no reason why you wouldn't have Pinterest boards. There's no reason why you wouldn't be, you know, Facebooking all day long. But again, with your stuff, it is quite cool though, in the sense that you're kind of B2B to C.
Yeah, it's a bit of a different one, isn't it? I know.
So, because it's quite nice, like you don't make widgets that then go into a plug socket and then you never really see the benefit of.
Yeah.
But it's quite a unique journey for you guys because you get to see the whole thing.
It is, and I think again we're quite well, I suppose lucky's not the right word, but we have worked with some really brilliant organisations who are really open and up for expanding in that. And you know, when you say yes, why shouldn't you use Instagram? Why shouldn't you go big on social? And why shouldn't you explore some of those avenues? I think almost that's probably where the dial's starting to turn a bit, because it used to be much more of a, as you say, less sexy, arguably a bit more conventional, a bit staid. And now those sort of lanes have kind of filtered away a bit, and here we are with exactly the same opportunity, and arguably more so because people haven't heard it as much. So by virtue of being new, you're already different. Yeah,
I mean, I think in terms of the sort of B2C side of things, you know, I remember I was working with this other contract caterer, B&I specialist, whatever you want to say, and we did a workshop for them, and it was about, because what's interesting is there's two parts to your marketing once you're in, I suppose, I think, in the sense of you want every person in the workplace to eat there as much as possible and ATV and whatever, and then use all that good stuff to then showcase that it's good for you to get the next client, I guess, right? If it's bluntly put it. So that was the thing, that actually it was all of these ways that you could market to people at their desks to then get them to go. And also it is just changing that perception of, so it's almost like if you lived in Brighton your whole life, so many people would move away and just go, well, that's where I grew up. They're looking for something else. So it is that sort of complacency or familiarity that even although they could have Tom Kerridge in there every single day cooking, let's say, you know, imagine that eventually they'd be like, you know, so it is that constant
change,
excitement, reinvention, you know, getting people really excited about it. You know?
And that's where I suppose, because we do now have access to being able to express from a brand perspective in so many different ways. There's no excuse now, really, is there? And I think, you know, just you mentioned Google earlier, but thinking about the likes of YouTube and how much of a creative sort of you know, ecosystem, for want of a better way of putting it, you know, and actually I think from a sales perspective, and actually just from any perspective, you have to sort of be able to be like a data journalist and a cultural anthropologist and a human being with emotions, and you need to, it's this, you know, that whole empathy piece we talked about. If you only focus on a product or what it is that you're actually trying to get sold, I just think it commoditizes the whole thing. And with food, that's just a crying shame, because it's capable of so much, you know, so much more than that.
Well, I think it's just giving it a bit of look and you know, just for it not to be that mirrored silver, you know, hatches with hot lamps and, you know, what else is possible, you know, and does there even need to be a till at all in a queue, you know, how does that work? And then there's the Amazon Go stuff. Is that being implemented, that people can just go in and out and you can shoplift legally, take the stuff, which is quite cool. So also I was thinking about, you know, the industry itself. So you're kind of in it, but not in it, you know, in that sort of way, and in certain ways, certain circles, because you're not a restaurant in its own right or something like that. So how are you managing to keep, you know, industry relationships alive and all that? How's that working?
I guess we're looking at it like clinically from a development strategy sort of perspective, it's always, as has ever been thus, relationships. And I think where there's, I guess, the most opportunity, I suppose, and again, it depends, doesn't it, what your ultimate aim is and what your motivation is. But I think for me personally, but from what's the space that we're in now, it's trying to find those people and those individuals who are like-minded and who are also looking to change the game a bit, and who see this whole positive disruption side of things not as intimidating and unsafe, but actually as the good option. So it's about identifying where those people are, how we can help them, and being quite unapologetic about the fact that we are not a conventional contract caterer. And we're really proud of that fact. And yes, we are part of a PLC, and one which hasn't historically been synonymous with food. But we've worked really hard, and obviously lots before me, because I didn't join before the rebrand. I came on later, so full credit to all those who the Heidis and Alistair, Rob, Barry, but it's about changing where we're trying to get to, and then just making sure that, okay, so if we're looking at that, does that really ring true, and does that really hold true of what we're ultimately trying to do, and then just making sure that the people that we're having those conversations with share that end goal. Because you're not, it's different, isn't it, when your name's above the door and you're in the high street, you have complete autonomy over exactly what it is that you're saying, what you're doing. When it's a marriage, like any marriage, it's not just about one voice, and you don't have carte blanche to go and do everything. So it becomes even more important to understand who you're marrying before you get married. That's the thing.
Well, yeah, and you end up having steps in your CD collection, which is very annoying, right next to the Stone Roses. But anyway, never mind. That's my own personal
and
gripe.
wasn't that a podcast you did? You've only got a few left, haven't you? Because you worked out how many could be accessed digitally, and then
I did CD Wow and get rid of them. Oh no, what was it? One of those things. Or Music Magpie. Yeah. It's not worth it. It's not worth it.
Now you've got a CD collection bereft of all its friends.
So I've just got rarities only. So never mind. And I'm buying all the back in vinyl as well. So I'm just going the other way. Also, the role of food in society. I know Gabby was sending you some stuff and talking to you about that. So in your LinkedIn bio, you're kind of passionately speaking about this. So
I think that sort of came about because I wanted to reassess for me, I suppose, part of what I actually wanted to be doing, and just sort of check in with that. And the more I researched some of the organisations that we're looking at, the more I actually thought, hang on a minute, there's a way of saying thank you through food to your people, and there are a lot of people doing it, but there are a lot of people that aren't doing it, and I just don't think you can ever say thank you enough. Personally, I think thank you and I love you are two things that you should just say freely and readily and whenever you feel them. And I think food's a vehicle through which you can do that. And I just love the idea of it, being I know it probably sounds a bit cheesy. I don't know how any of this is going to sound, but this is the reality of it. I just think that there's a way of giving through food that actually you can't really replicate with any other medium, because it unites everybody. Everybody has to eat. I'm not saying anything that everyone doesn't already know, but I just think for me that's really exciting, because there's a way there of being able to do something that's really socially and environmentally responsible, but in a way that boosts and makes people feel good. And then I think I put in a bit there about how it's a new kind of heritage industry, and that's because food goes back till the start of time. And you think about the heritage industry, and it invites tourists in, discover history in a new way, make it relevant to today, And actually, whenever someone's eating your foods, there'll be a historical story that predates that one mealtime or one coffee. But for them, in that moment in time, it takes on its own relevance in its own context, within its own narrative. And for me, I just think that's fascinating.
It's pretty special. Just when you said about since the dawn of time, have you seen the 3 advert? The three
Which
phone,
one?
the new 3 phone advert.
No.
So it's like historical moment. Look up on YouTube if you
Okay.
put 3 and it's the latest ad that's up, and it's about 2.5 minutes long. So it's like a
Oh
cinema
wow. Okay.
ad kind of thing. And anyway, what's happening is there's it's the the Titanic, but the captain's got a 3 phone, so you can see the iceberg or whatever, and then there's Henry VIII's like going through Tinder for wives, which is
Amazing.
cool. But then one of the things was there's cavemen and women on the side of a mountain, and they're like hungry, and all this. Anyway, they order a Deliveroo, so they order Franco
Brilliant.
Manca
Brilliant.
pizza on Deliveroo, and then the Deliveroo drivers, coming up the
Yeah.
mountain, just like there
Love
you go,
it.
kind of thing. So it's just quite that kind of funny
Yeah.
smash of things together.
Yeah.
But you had a stat, 894 million companies in the world.
Oh, so and originally I had it's an impossible stat to validate, isn't it?
Well,
It
sounds
impossible.
good, yeah.
So says Google. I did put at
Okay.
the bottom, just
Yeah.
as a disclaimer. And it was one of the many sort of trains of thought that I kind of went down whilst looking at something, and it just sort of occurred to me that is a massively untapped conversation. I mean, I don't even know how to term it. But yeah, here is something that doesn't have to cost a lot of money, that means something to everybody, depending on how you frame it. And we should be using it more to do good in its most simplistic form. And I just, sometimes I think thank you's underused, and it's lovely when it's said, it's lovely when it's heard, and food's just a wonderful way of being able to do it. And it can be really basic and really simple, or it can be really elaborate and really exciting, and the results and culmination of months and months of hard work. But that's the beauty of it too.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
Definitely. And yeah, I think everyone needs praise, don't they? And especially sort of running your own company or whatever, it gets lonely, and there's not many people that go. That's why I was so almost in tears this morning with your lovely sort of sculpture thing with people saying nice things about the podcast and stuff. And yeah, you don't take it for granted.
No.
You don't hear it, and then even when you do get praise, I'm never very good at it going through the external.
Yeah,
force
which for
field.
the record, Mark, is lovely because it's evident, and I think it just makes it all the more worthy of celebrating because you're clearly doing it for all the right reasons. And the everyone who sent messages back, and that comes across too, because you haven't read them yet, I know.
I haven't read them.
But
I'll be in
kindness
tears.
comes across a lot, and talent comes through a lot, and those two together are just a winning combination. So I know that you're now going to do a case in point of not wanting to take a compliment, but this as a podcast, I think, stood out to me because actually it has complete relevance irrespective of whether you're in food or not. And some of the words that were said, it was very much obviously about you and about what you've been doing, but there's a significance there that far exceeds just the food, and I guess that is probably one of the main things that makes it a really cool industry to work in, doesn't it? Because you're not ever really just working in food, are you? You're working in absolutely everything that's connected.
Well, I think it's always just trying to say every single week, there's huge opportunities that we're not taking advantage of in this industry. And it's just like, take one tip from one of these things and please go and do it, and it doesn't have to be through us or, it's nothing about that. It's just, get your digital sorted, get your strategy sorted, get your brand in shape, so it's continuous reinforcement of that too,
And it feeds, I think, if you're that way inclined, that's why I love the Tea Palace time in my life, because it appeals to me to, get really good at something, feel like I really have learnt something. And so it's that kind of esoteric knowledge bit, I suppose. But I think food allows you to be as expressive as you possibly want to be. And, if we think about, I don't probably isn't the time to go into all of that. But, if you think about the planet, if you think about where you are sitting at this precise moment in time, if you may be listening, and what you've eaten, what you're going to eat, whether you're going to go out for food with someone, what you've done with your recycling, what you've made with your leftovers, if you've made anything with your leftovers, it becomes an emotional, political, social. It's a binary thing.
Yeah.
And obviously you're in food too, so you share the love. But I do genuinely think it is rare to have an industry that increasingly has such huge significance and relevance to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And that just feels like a privilege, to be part of somewhere that's has the opportunity to do so much that's good and that benefits, so many people.
I think you're right, and I think that's how everyone's lobbying at the government level as well. Kate Nichols and all these wonderful people, sort of championing the industry because the stats of how many people work in this thing, how much money it generates, how it makes people feel, how it's part of everything, and business rates are going through the roof, and everything's every single day now you're seeing someone of note, not that anyone isn't of note, but someone
I know exactly what you mean.
Going, and it's only going to continue for the next while. And I think Robin Rowland, my old boss at Yo, he said a brilliant thing at the caterer thing the other day, and he said, obviously do our best, to the business rates and all that, but actually it's consumers and consumer confidence that's going to get us out this mess. And then what does that mean? Well, actually that means that marketing and messaging and constantly pushing to get people in is going to start that journey and kickstart that journey.
Well, was it, how do you pronounce his surname, Mark? James, is it Hassan?
Hakon.
Hakon.
Yeah.
Hakon. That's
or Haken. Haken like bacon, he told me once.
I remember that then.
Yeah.
Haken like bacon. And that, that podcast I got masses, from, because the thing that stood out was the whole seismic shift that's starting to happen. But about the importance of having marketing at board level and how much of an impact that has. And Grow by Jim Stengel, that I think I mentioned at that point. But, he was piloted in to help in situations where, on paper, there was, commercial calamities, but actually, how do you fix those? The sort of diagnosis was much more about cultural, brand identity and to have that feeling of belonging. And the thing that stood out, and I'm, Pizza Hut used to be our treat at the end of term. We used to be able to get a deep pan.
Very good. Old school.
Yeah, very. This is going back a bit now. But the redefining of why actually should people buy a pizza from you as opposed to anywhere else, and why do you exist as a brand? And there's the whole Simon Sinek start with why, but this was a similar, that how actually if you have an ideal at the heart of the business, then you increase its profitability 50 times greater than those that don't. Or even more than that, actually, I think it was in the end. But it was about, Pizza Hut exists, and I'm paraphrasing, but essentially to enable more time to spend, with your families, connecting. And it does speak to something that is way beyond just, the sum of your pepperoni slice.
Sure, but the thing that infuriates me on a, not that I get that angry, but just, niggles at me most weeks is if you actually sat down and asked a huge percentage, the majority by far of the operators that are out there that are the chains, whatever, and you said, what's your why?
Yeah.
They'll have nothing.
Yeah.
Oh, because it's always been, and because it's a commercial opportunity, and because, well, I'm here to make this target. No. What's your why? Motivationally, what's in your gut and your blood and your, all that, and emotions, and it'll just, for a lot of people, it's just a job. There's a lot of professional CEO, C-suite people out there, and they could be working with Wonderbra to BMW to Highland Spring to a phone company.
Yeah.
Sort of doesn't matter. Yeah. And it's the people that love it that'll endure.
Yeah, that's true. And it's hard, isn't it? When you scale, I think it's tricky. It's easier if you're small to be able to have a really strong message that stays and sticks and is consistent. But
it feels like that's your job, though, as a CEO, isn't it?
I think
if
it does
you just
start
protect
from
the why,
yeah,
and or the why might evolve a bit over time or whatever. But if that's all you did was brainwash everyone into that's what we're doing, that feels pretty big. But they all seem to miss that.
But it's walking the walk too, isn't it? Because it's all very well being able to talk about it, but it's putting yourself in the opportunity within the opportunities and the places where actually you can realise that. And I do think a lot filters down from the top. Yeah. And I hope Alistair wouldn't mind me saying, but he's colourful, and sometimes in an industry that can feel a bit beige, that stands out. Yeah. And I think you need to sometimes just keep banging that drum, that irrespective of what may be happening at a wider group level or at a wider marketplace, a wider sector, whatever your terminology, that actually if you can just keep intrinsically focused on what it is that you started out to try and achieve, which was ultimately the defining reason why you existed in the first place, and not lose that, then people will hear. It's a powerful message. But you also, I think, have to be listening in order to hear it. It's not just the role, I think, from a leadership perspective. I think you need to be listening and wanting to hear those things too. It's not just about a one-way spiel. So I think if you are wanting to listen and wanting to hear and wanting to do that, then you need both.
Well, it's interesting you say that. It just reminded me, I was so if you ever have a few drinks, you do like a YouTube disco. I do a little YouTube, then I go through all like music videos
lots of discos in our house.
Just at a late night when everyone's in bed sitting. So I was watching a Stone Roses interview, and it's when they're awkward and arsey, basically, to this sort of young reporter lady, which is a shame for her. But he says, and what you were saying, it's about people will fall in love with you eventually. It's inevitable. So if you just keep on, it, because a lot of people weren't getting the Stone Roses when they first came out and all this stuff, and although one of the greatest bands ever now, at the time that was a bit, what's all this? So as he just said, just keep doing it, and people will fall in love.
Amazing,
it's
isn't
inevitable, with a wee smile on his face. So it's just like.
And what was it I read the other day? Fascinating. So it took 10,000 hours for the Beatles to get to a point where they felt that they were. You know, and it's practice.
Same with athletes, that 10,000 hour rule.
Unbelievable, isn't it? But it's a mindset too, because you can practice unmindfully, or whatever the right way of putting it is, and it won't have the same. So it's not just the act of doing it. I think it's being conscious of what it is that you're trying, and why it is that you're trying to do it, whatever the it might be. If that makes sense.
You can do it unconsciously, and you're not in the moment. You can fly through guitar chords and never give it a second thought, but if you're feeling every note, it's a very different experience for sure.
And this is one thing about he's an influencer on LinkedIn, James. I can't pronounce his I'm not sure how you pronounce his surname, but I think it's Altica or Alticha. He's one of the top 10 LinkedIn influencers. And I read a piece from him, and it was about getting better at anything makes you get better at everything. So do one thing and concentrate on one thing, and you'll find everything else gets a bit better. And I think I always obviously relate the stuff back to the food, because I'm doing a lot of this to, add value to what I'm trying to give value to others who we're working with. But for that moment in time, I just thought that's so true. If you go into an operation and you think, actually, just get this bit right, just get that bit right, and you'll find that actually it has a sort of a growing effect on the rest of it, and it's really true. And this is where you start with an idea, and sometimes it doesn't even necessarily end up in the way that it began, but you focus obsessively on getting that idea and crystallizing what that means and what that could mean to someone else. Then it will become something.
Definitely. We always say to people, just try and spend as much time as you can on the brief. And I think Sony balls, remember the coloured balls going down? I think the brief took 18 months.
I bet.
To nail that brief. And then once, then it's academic after, it's pretty simple. So I'm looking at time, and I'm thinking
Yes.
I might let you go because you've got a life
Thank you.
and stuff to do, and you've been up all night hammering away at the sculpture. So I was just thinking one last thought, and I'm in two minds actually. I guess there's a professional one, which is, any tips for marketers, salespeople, anything that you're thinking. But actually, another tip for people just to stay well and healthy mentally, I think would be interesting too.
Okay. Crumbs. Professionally, I think really the best way forward, and I say that, collectively, best for everyone involved, is to obviously think strategically, but it has to come back to what the meaning is, what the value is going to be, and what someone else can get out of what you're selling. So I've read loads of books from, strategic selling, the whole Miller Hyman, to the Simon Sinek and Grow. And I think different things will resonate with different people. But you can be as strategically minded as you like. But if you don't really tap into the heart of why something matters, that strategy doesn't really mean anything.
Yeah.
So that'd be the first one. And then from a well-being perspective, I'll try and say this without getting emotional, but I think it's just, if you're having a really tough time, just be gentle to yourself and make peace with the fact that you're in it, and just seek so much solace from the fact that there are wonderful voices out there that you could listen to, and it will get better, and you can work really hard and really well with wonderful people. It doesn't have to stop you, but if you don't feel like it at that time, that's okay too.
Yeah, brilliant.
Hope that's okay.
This has been amazing. Thank you so much
Thank you for having
just
me.
making my day and brightening it up. So thank you. And just wish you well with Gather and Gather and everything else that you're involved with.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Yeah, I just can't wait to see you just seismically change the industry.
Oh, thanks, Mark. It's been a total privilege and more than a bit humbling and a little bit emotional. So I almost got there.
Almost there.
So thank you ever so much, and to everybody who helped create your sculpture.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Thank you.